Evaluating the validity and accuracy of the PEAK-E assessment and the PEAK-E curriculum in a single case evaluation across 3 individuals with autism by Kara Lucas. Hi, just wanted to give a quick introduction about myself before I present my thesis here. My name is Kara Lucas. I am currently working towards my master's degree in rehabilitation and behavior analysis. So this is my thesis proposal. I work up in Chicago at a company called Autism Home Support Services. We primarily do in-home ABA therapy with our clients. The position that I hold with AHSS is post-supervision intern. So once I finished up my supervision, I was able to take on some cases and some clients to get that experience as a BCBA under the supervision of a BCBA, of course. So that is what I have been doing for the past couple months here towards the end of my graduate degree, and here is my thesis defense. A quick summary of this study is that it evaluated the validity, reliability, and accuracy of the PEAK-E assessment and curriculum. It looked at 3 individuals with autism, and it showed that all participants were able to demonstrate derived responses using the PEAK-E curriculum. Over the past 40 years, the prevalence of ASD has tenfold, and a common statistic is that 1 in 68 children are identified with ASD. The DSM criterion for ASD says persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction across multiple contexts. Majority of the deficits that we see in a lot of children and people with ASD is the language deficits. These common language deficits can include anything from a lack of speech to speech delays to poor comprehension in speech to echoed or repetitive speech behaviors or exceedingly literal understanding of language. So these language deficits are pretty prevalent in children with ASD. And overall, there's been an enormous increase in the number of individuals with developmental disorders, which is causing concern for many individuals, like parents, healthcare providers, educators, and just a variety of people in society. And even more importantly is with this increase in developmental disabilities, we need an increase in specialized or individualized assessments or mental health plans in order to help this population that has grown so much. For years, the field has utilized Skinner's theory of verbal behavior to help with developing language in populations experiencing language deficits. No doubt, Skinner has been the father of our field. He analyzes language just as any non-verbal behavior goes. Our behaviors are shaped by our environment, just as Skinner says. Verbal behavior has a widely successful intervention component in the world of ABA and in the intervention with individuals with autism. Skinner's verbal behavior was developed in 1957, and since then the field has grown to study more complex behaviors, just as a natural evolution of the field. We study behaviors like perspective taking and temporal reasoning and problem solving, which now has caused more contemporary ABA approaches to evolve. These include things such as stimulus equivalence, RFT, and name theory. RFT and stimulus equivalence in particular have been an inspiration behind the PEAK equivalence module. What is RFT and what is stimulus equivalence? So RFT is just a continuation of verbal behavior. Hayes proposes that derived relational responding is another verbal operant. Relational framing is placing stimuli into various relational frames, giving contextual cues. A relational frame is a unit of responding and a functional behavior. There are a number of frames, but the one in particular that I will talk about is frame of coordination. This in particular looks at stimulus equivalence. For example, stimulus A is the same as stimulus B. Stimulus equivalence looks at accurate responding stimulus to stimulus relations that are not directly trained or reinforced. Stimulus equivalence is tested by looking for reflexivity, symmetry, and transivity, among given stimulus to stimulus relations. It's similar to mathematical statement. If A is B and then B is C, then A is C. Research has embarked on ways that we can really help develop certain skills in this population of individuals. And one way that Hayes proposes that we do this is to look at those contemporary approaches like stimulus equivalence and relational frame theory and really work on the derived relational responding piece as an overarching skill to teach versus just teaching things naturally through the content. This is a little bit different than your traditional approaches, which focus on the content, whereas Hayes proposes that we need to focus on the skill itself of teaching them how to derive these relations. Hayes proposed that multiple exemplar training is a key educational strategy. Multiple exemplar training is used with stimulus equivalence frequently in literature. For example, Barnes, Holmes, and al. In 2001 taught children between the ages of 4 and 5 to arbitrarily respond in symmetrical relations. They were able to derive relations given just 1 to 2 multiple exemplars. Rosales, Reinfeld, and Lovett in 2001 demonstrated that multiple exemplar training was effective in teaching preschoolers a second language. And another really cool piece of literature that shows that this derived relational responding piece can be done at a really young age was done by Luciano, Gomez, and Valverde in 2007. They showed that a 15-month-old infant was actually able to derive symmetrical relations. Hayes stated that multiple exemplar training does naturally occur in the education process for many individuals. However, these tasks aren't designed to specifically target that relation, rather it's just trained incidentally through the education process. This incidental teaching piece may or may not be effective for individuals with developmental disabilities. That's why the peak equivalence module is designed to target this deficit of derived relational responding in individuals with developmental disabilities. It utilizes multiple exemplar training in order to train derived relations specifically targets training the skill. Traditional approaches have been the leading way for ABA for years now, but interestingly enough, there has been more empirical research from contemporary approaches compared to those more traditional approaches. Diamond, O'Hara, Whelan, and O'Donovan in 2006 completed a citation analysis of Skinner's verbal behavior, and they uncovered that there were 1,929 citations since verbal behavior was first published. However, across a 20-year span, a Skinner verbal operant was an independent, dependent, or observational variable on only 67 empirical articles. Versus for contemporary approaches, Diamond, May, Moloney, and Hoon in 2010 said RFT has spawned more basic operant work than almost any other theory put forward during that time. In the citation analysis, there were 42 empirical articles related to RFT and 20 empirical articles related to other contemporary concepts like equivalence relations across just a 17-year span. In this field, we are data-driven. We use assessments, which are tools that guide our intervention and treatment plans for our individuals with developmental disabilities. These assessments need to be valid and they need to be reliable. They need to measure what we intend them to measure and really uncover those deficits that we need to find for these individuals. The VB map is a popular and useful tool in the ABA field. However, there is no published study supporting the relative validity or reliability. On the other hand, the PEAK direct training module shows a strong IOA data. In addition, Dixon et al. In 2015 showed that individuals with a total PEAK score of 138 out of 368 possible had all the skills that were assessed in the VB map. Essentially, there is this ceiling effect with the VB map. It caps out at a certain age. So then you don't have skills that you can continually work on, whereas the PEAK encompasses more skills. It is important to the field to understand the degree to which these assessments used measure what they intend to measure. Some things we need to look at for these assessments include construct validity and content validity, which looks at the basis of the causal relationship between the intervention and the behavior change. Another type of validity assessments should measure is criterion validity. Criterion validity or training validity will require assessments to A. Identify skills that individuals are and are not able to perform outside of the assessment setting, and B. Skills that the individual is able to acquire. A lot of treatment and intervention research relies on group designs, which primarily uses this gold standard for intervention, which is randomized controlled trials. But the problem with group designs is they generalize their results. So this whole group gets condensed into an average number, and it's supposed to be applicable to every individual, which isn't always the case. Single case designs do it a little bit different. They use repeated assessments over time. But why is this so important that we need to use this single case design in order to discover the validity and efficacy? Well, increasing numbers of developmentally delayed populations do not need generalized results on treatments that may or may not be useful on a majority of similar individuals, but rather what assessments and treatments that can specifically be effective across individuals or across a specific individual. Many language assessments lack the efficacy and validity, which our field strives to embody. However, the present study seeks to evaluate the criterion validity and efficacy of the peak equivalent module for individuals with autism. The peak-E has incorporated the field's basic original operants, explored new empirical territory, which was suggested by Hayes and Sidman, including stimulus equivalence and RFT. Previous research has already demonstrated the peak-E's effectiveness in teaching individuals with disabilities to derive relations, including studies that look at derived relations related to WH questions, rule-governed behaviors in social games, and even learning geometry. It bridges the gap between the highly technical language in the scientific community, and it makes it more approachable for others, such as clinicians, parents, educators, and other professionals. Most importantly, it sets out to uphold our field's defining principles of having effective, evidence-based assessments. The current study aims to determine if the combined results of the peak pre-assessment and the peak assessment are effective in providing individualized targets for each of the participants in the study, and 2, if the identified skills from the peak E assessment were skills that the participants were not already able to perform those skills outside of the assessment, and 3, if the peak E curriculum was effective in teaching the targeted skills, meaning that the identified skills were indeed skills that the participant is able to learn, and 4, if following the directly training a subset of skills, the individuals were successfully able to derive untrained relations. Ultimate goal of the peak E is being able to derive untrained relations. Ultimately, this evaluation will help expand upon the growing body of literature that is supporting the peak E relational training system for individuals with autism, while overall promoting a need for efficacy and validity amongst language development assessments used in the field of applied behavior analysis. Participants and settings. In this study, the participants were 2 boys and 1 girl. All had the diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. All of them received in-home ABA services at the same company, and they were all from a large Midwestern city. Inclusion criterion for the participants was that they were receiving ABA for at least 6 months. They could follow simple instructions such as come sit, do this, and they were able to attend to stimuli or the instructor for at least 5 minutes at a time. Exclusionary criteria was if the participant scored a 48 out of 48 on the pre-assessment and or 182 out of the 184 items on the peak assessment, because this study ultimately was looking for 3 skills in order to train. So therefore, if they only had, less than those 3 skills, they didn't qualify. Another exclusionary criterion was if the participant was not able to obtain the skill after suggested modifications in the training skill for 80 trial blocks, then the experimenter would reevaluate the participant's eligibility and ultimately check with the BCBA on that participant's case. All experimental sessions took place outside of regular scheduled ABA sessions and inside the participant's home. There were 3 participants in the study. They go by the names of Amy, Chris, and Sam within this study. Amy is 6 years old, Chris was 6 years old, and Sam was 6 years old. They were all diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, and they all received in-home services of ABA for approximately 12 hours a week. Amy was in a typical kindergarten class at a public school. Chris and Sam both were in inclusion special education classrooms at a public school. Materials were determined by the specific PEE programs addressed and were all listed within the assessment and within the curriculum. The first thing we looked at is the PEE pre-assessment, which is 48 items that is used to assess the participant's ability to derive these relations. The PEE pre-assessment also uses stimuli that are arbitrary or nonsense. The stimuli that are presented go across all of the senses, and this assessment helps us determine the participant's ability to derive the arbitrary relations, and it could also be determined which items on the PEE assessment to assess first. So based on the score that they get in the pre-assessment, it determines where we would begin at in the PEE assessment. The next thing addressed after the PEEK pre-assessment is the PEEK-E assessment, which is 184 item criterion reference assessment of the individual skill. Each skill involves learning a discrete training of a relation and then deriving that tested relation. The skills in the PEEK-E assessment increase in complexity similar to the general complexity of the skills. The next thing we looked at is the PEEK-E curriculum, and it's designed with a set of programs that provide instructions on how to teach non-mastered skills that were identified as deficits in the PEEK-E assessment. Each program had 1 page with teaching instructions, a list of needed materials specific to that program, a diagram of the expected relations, and a goal statement. PEEK-E also had data sheets that provide information regarding the prompts needed and the skill mastery criteria. As a quick walkthrough of what the procedure really looked like in the study, the first thing to do is to conduct the long form of the PEEK-E pre-assessment, and how the participants scored in the pre-assessment predicts where to begin in the PEEK-E assessment. After completing the pre-assessment, we moved on to conducting the PEEK-E equivalence assessment. And if any point in time during the assessment the participant was not able to do 3 consecutive skills in the assessment, then we stopped the assessment and moved into teaching the curriculum in those programs that the kiddo missed. After the curriculum was completed and the child was able to master those 3 skills, then we went back in to test the PEEK-E equivalence again to see if they were able to derive any relations on any other skills within the assessment. In baseline, all the specific relations in the program were addressed, including both the train and test relations. We completed a series of trial blocks until a pattern was revealed. No reinforcement or social praise interaction was provided to the participant for correct or incorrect responses during baseline, and the instructor used a neutral tone of voice. The experimenter did give the participant a short break, about 2 to 3 minutes in between trial blocks, and this was not contingent upon performance. The treatment sessions consisted of both the train and test conditions, where the train conditions, the participant received corrective feedback if necessary, and we used least to most intrusive prompting. After the correct response was emitted by the participants, social praise and a preferred reinforcer was given. However, during the test trials, it was a little bit more similar to baseline, where there was no corrective feedback given and there was a neutral tone of voice used. Each participant was granted a 2 to 3 minute break after each trial block, and this was not contingent upon their performance. Here is a chart showing all of the Peak E curriculum programs that were used across the 3 participants. They were all symmetry programs, and they were different for each participant. Measurement and reliability. The dependent variable was the Peak E scores and the percentage correct scores. Calculated Peak E scores range from 0 to 10. As you can see on here, there's the response scoring. For IOA, 31% of the experimental trials had a second observer score the participants' responses from a recorded video, and 33% of the trials in the Peak E pre-assessment and Peak E assessment were completed with a second observer, same way with a recorded video. 88% IOA for the experimental sessions, 100% for the Peak pre-assessment, and 91% for the Peak EA. For results, here in the table to the left, you can see that the Peak pre-assessment results are listed. Amy had a total score of 25, Chris had a total score of 15, and Sam had a total score of 2. To the right here, you can see the Peak E pre and post assessment results. You can see that Amy initially scored a 47, and after intervention or completing the Peak E curriculum programs, she was able to score a 54 on the post assessment. Chris scored 14 on the Peak E on the Peak E assessment, and he had a pretty significant jump up to 26 after intervention. And then for Sam, he scored a 29 on the Peak E assessment initially, and then after intervention and working on those Peak E curriculum programs, he scored a 38. These figures represent the performance of the first participant, Amy. During baseline, Amy did not have accurate responses for any of the test or train relations that were above chance level. Her scores ranged from 0 to 40 during these trials. The programs were addressed in the order of the Peak assessment and how it introduces the programs. The first one addressed is the regional capitals, and Amy was not able to correctly identify the test train relations. Once intervention followed, there was an increasing trend, and she met mastery criteria within seven trial blocks. Then shortly after those training trials, she did master the test relation. For Program 8A, Symmetry, Stimulus, Abstraction, during intervention, she met the mastery criteria within 2 trial blocks for the train relationship. However, during the test relationship, she had only 50% accuracy. So we completed more training relations, again, meeting that mastery criterion for the train relations. And during the test relations, she was successful after that. During the maintenance probe, you can see that she had 100% responding for both the test and train relations. And then the last program that was taught to Amy is the Symmetry Basic Algebra. Once intervention began, you could see that there's a steady increase in the Peak score across 8 trial blocks until she met that mastery for the training trials. And then during the test probe, she didn't meet that mastery criteria, so we went again into those training relations. But then shortly following the second time mastering, she was able to master the test relations as well. The graphs here are of Chris, the second participant in the study. He worked on all symmetry programs, and during baseline conditions, he was not able to show mastery or sufficient level of ability to complete the test or train trials. The graphs here show Chris's performance. During baseline, he was not able to meet mastery criteria for either train or test trials. However, upon intervention, as you can see here in 5A, symmetry to picture to text, he quickly was able to master that training criteria. However, when we went to test the test relationship, he was not able to meet criteria of 90% across 2 trial blocks. Therefore, we went back into the training procedure, and then after that second training procedure around the 13th trial block, when we tested for the test relations, he was able to meet that criteria. And then as you can see during the maintenance probe, he was able to maintain that skill even later on. For 5B, symmetry translation, you can see that it took a little bit longer to train the initial skill. And then when he met mastery criteria, he immediately wasn't able to derive the relationship. So we went back into training for 2 more trial blocks. And then after that, he met the criteria. You can also see that in maintenance, he was able to have that maintained later on. The last thing, 5C, that we worked on, he quickly showed the ability to master the training relations, and then right afterwards had that immediate transfer trial where he was able to master the test relations as well. And again, this was maintained later on down the road when those maintenance probes were addressed. Seen here is the results for Sam, our third participant in the study. Sam was not able to demonstrate the train or test skills in any of the baseline conditions. He was able to meet training criteria for a lot of these programs pretty quickly. However, whenever the test relationship was probed, he was not able to meet that relationship. So we did kind of go in and out of the of the train test procedure for a little while. As you can see with the first one for symmetry translation, he was able to meet mastery criteria around the 20th trial block. For auditory to syllables, he was able to meet it around the 22nd trial block. And then for symmetry sight reading, he was able to meet mastery criteria for the test relation around the 29th trial block. For 5B, symmetry translation, and 6I, those maintenance probes demonstrated that he was able to maintain the skill later on in the experiment as well, which is a good thing. The results from the current study demonstrate the methods outlined in the peak equivalence module assessment and curriculum are valid, reliable, and effective. During this study, the peak pre-assessment demonstrated that these individuals did not have a significant ability to derive specific relations already in his or her repertoire. After treatment, each participant was able to acquire the targeted skill from the curriculum. Maintenance probes were also very successful, and after successful implementation of the peak e-curriculum, these individuals were able to derive relations and even increase their overall peak scores. As you can see with the chart to the right, you can see that improvement. Overall, the results from the study demonstrate that the skill for derived relational responding was emerging across all of the individuals post-intervention. For some further analysis, Amy, specifically when working on the symmetry region capitals, she needed more prompting initially, and this program was all vocal stimuli, and this was consistent with what her IEP had stated. Her IEP has in place some, textual prompts or some assisted aid when it comes to a lot of that vocal stimuli. So this program was a little bit more difficult for her, but she was still able to, derive those relationships over a period of time. Another neat thing that Amy did during her symmetry abstraction program was that she kind of came up with novel responses herself. So if the experimenter were to say, what is this one like? And originally I trained her to say the cookie is, sweet, or find the cookie that is sweet and round, she would come back later when I tested for the relationship and I would say, what is this one like? She would say sweet, round, and gooey. So she would add her own novel, arbitrary, responding as well. Chris's skill acquisition was rapid during the treatment condition. However, once intervention ensued, Chris was able to effectively demonstrate many of the targeted skills, and his performance was consistent with something called immediate transfer, where a participant reaches a predetermined mastery criteria right when the first test relationship is assessed. Many times, test relation does not occur immediately, and it can require more exposure to those training trials. However, the immediate transfer test relation solidifies the idea that Chris was able to derive the correct relations based on the training trials. Repeated trials and testing trials can expose the participant to other contingencies, such as advantageous feedback. This you can kind of see with Sam. This is where the participant has repeated train test trials until the criterion performance emerges, which may cause some indirect feedback. And we saw this a little bit with Sam. He would go in and out of those test and train trials. So the participant may think, oh, I keep getting the same problem, and then maybe that answer is wrong. So Diamond and Reinfeld in 2002 noted that if you have limited choices or two-choice procedures, that could cast doubt on the transfer performance. However, in order to really combat that, all of the participants' field size for stimuli was at least 3 or more. In addition, the mastery criteria for the test relations was 80% correct responding across the trial blocks, which ensues greater experimental control and less likely that the transfer of stimulus was related to, that indirect feedback or just your basic testing exposures. The study demonstrates contribution of literature to the accuracy and validity of the PEAK-E assessment that is already existing. The single case design in the study allows researchers to view the individual performance of each participant in the study. And overall, this study contributes to the existing literature regarding the entire PEAK relational training system. Some key points to take away from this study is that the PEAK-E assessment demonstrated the ability to predict specific outcomes, which include that individuals with ASD can accurately derive untrained relations when utilizing the PEAK-E curriculum. This is increasingly important due to the rise of individuals with developmental disabilities and that need for individualized assessments and treatment plans for individuals, since we've seen such a rise. Other key points is that the PEAK pre-assessment and the PEAK assessment were effective in providing individualized targets for each of the participants in the study. The PEAK-E assessment were skills in which the participant did not already have in their repertoire, and the PEAK-E curriculum was effective in teaching those targeted skills. Results showed that individuals with ASD were able to successfully derive untrained relations after direct training of specific subset of skills outlined in those PEAK-E programs. So everything seemed to be valid and effective and really beneficial to the individuals overall. Just like any other body of research, there are limitations within this study. The first one is experimental sessions were spread out across a span of months. The individuals were very busy individuals as far as they had in-home ABA therapy, outside extracurricular activities. So it really came down to when was the best time to schedule things with the experimenter and with the family and the participants as well. So it kind of caused a little bit more of an elongated process and not a back-to-back experimental sessions. Another limitation to the study is that the experimenter had limited prior exposure with the participants. So Chris and Sam both had zero exposure to the experimenter, whereas Amy had very limited exposure. The experimenter did not have any direct sessions with any of these participants, so that lack of exposure could have also led to, longer time to acquire some of the skills as well. The next important thing to note, Chris seemed to be a little prompt dependent during the assessment and the pre-assessment. He would often respond with phrases like "I don't know" or "I need help." Chris and Sam are both brothers, and as you can see in their Peak E pre-assessment and post-assessment scores, they had significant differences. Chris did much better in the pre-assessment, but not as many skills in the actual assessment, whereas Sam, had a relatively low score in the pre-assessment, but had a higher number of skills within the assessment. The main reason behind this is Chris was younger and Sam was older, and Sam actually did have a lot of skills that Chris did not, as far as being able to read, being able to write, and a lot of those skills that were assessed in the Peak E assessment, Chris was not able to do, so that's why you see a little bit of the difference there. Some other limitations include that the study was only done in the participants' homes, so it wasn't done across a variety of environments, so it was not generalized across environments. The only participant that did have the opportunity to generalize across environments was Amy. We conducted one session in autism center, and then the rest of them were in the in-home setting. Another limitation is that there was only 3 participants and that only 3 Peak E programs were explored. Future research includes completing the assessment until there are 5 consecutive skill deficits that are found. The Peak equivalence module does state to complete the Peak E assessment until there are 5 deficits found. So a future study can follow that protocol set in the assessment. Another thing is that the Peak E is designed to be completed in multiple environments. So completing this in a school or across different communities or, and across different homes, just those different settings would be a good exploration for future research. Another thing to think about for future research is to use other individuals outside of autism. There's a lot of developmental disabilities other than autism. Even though autism is the most prevalent, it would be a really neat thing to see how Peak can be really effective, possibly for other populations. And then also to explore how Peak E scores relate to other educational curriculums, such as IQ tests. In conclusion, the current study highlights the importance of utilizing stimulus equivalence and RFT to teach individuals with developmental disabilities more complex behaviors, specifically related to cognition and language. Dixon's 2015 Peak E module is able to utilize stimulus equivalence, RFT, multiple exemplar training, and more in order to create this effective assessment. This study really set out to look at the efficacy and validity surrounding the Peak E module, surrounding a language assessment, and it is really steadfast with Beowulf and Riesle's 1968 defining principles of our field, one of which is being effective. So it is really important to our field that we have these effective assessments that we can use. In the end, the current study demonstrated the effectiveness of the Peak E assessment and the curriculum in individuals with developmental disabilities. And that is the conclusion of my thesis defense. So if there are any questions, you can address them to me, and I would be happy to answer them. Thank you for watching.